Chapter 18. Not Alone. I told you her bark was worse than her bite, Carrie said, escorting me to the first bus back to Boston. The moment she found out what you had done, she summoned me. Boy, did she ever bawl me out. How could I be so stupid to give you the money to travel alone? Why didn't I bring you right back to her instead of driving you to Boston? How could I let you go back to West Virginia? She made it sound as if I sent you to go work in the coal mines. I thought she might take me out to sea and make me walk the plank. What did you do? I asked him. I let her chop up the water until she was exhausted and red in the face, and then I calmly stood up and said, Grandma, it was all your fault. You did? We boarded the bus and took our seats. I did. What did she do? She flopped back in her seat, so shocked by my accusation and courage, she could only move her mouth. Nothing came out. Then it was my turn. How dare you just lay all that misery on Melanie like that, I told her. What did you expect would happen if you made someone feel less than nothing? If you took away the years and years of belief in the only life she'd ever known? She loved Uncle Chester like a father, I said. Well, she stuttered. The girl wanted to hear the truth, so I gave it to her. How would you like it if someone were to give it to you right between the eyes like that, Grandma? I demanded. Then she just stared at me for a moment. What did she say? I asked. She said that was exactly what happened to her. First with her sister, then with her 19 years later with your mother, Haley. I told her that she should have known better then. She should have known how it would feel. Then I sat across from her and watched her. She stared at the floor for the longest time without speaking. Finally she said, You're right, Carrie. You're a lot older and wiser than I thought. In some ways, you're the smartest of us all. She straightened up in her chair, the way that she does, you know, in that regal voice of hers, and demanded that I find you and bring you back. She told me she would give me the money and she wanted me to go on the road immediately. She said that she would take care of my father and not to worry. So, he said, smiling, here I am. The bus started away. But I thought you told me you knew who my father was. I thought you said you were going to tell me more. I was getting to that. I didn't just jump up to do her bidding, you know? He said proudly. It amused me to see how proud he was that he stood up to his grandmother. I just sat there and stared at her until she said, Are you going after her or not? I thought a moment and said, I can't bring her back unless you tell me the truth, Grandma. Otherwise, why would she want to come back? Well, Grandma Olivia deflated like a punctured blowfish and nodded. It was your father, she began, who came to me one day after Haley and Chester had left. Even though he had a terrible fight with Chester and gotten the worst of it, I might add, he felt very low and bad that he had lost his brother. The three of them had been inseparable, but not always, Jacob hinted, indicating that he knew something more. I pursued this until he told me that many of the nights Haley was supposed to be spending with her girlfriend, she'd been spending it with the Childs. The Childs? You mean she was with the Judge's family, I asked? Yes, specifically Kenneth. During that last year, Kenneth was in Providencetown a lot, Carrie said. He was going to Boston University at undergraduate school. He was supposed to go to become a lawyer, but he was also heavily into sculpture, and the Judge had a studio built for him at their home. Your mother was there almost every weekend. Kenneth was there. Kenneth Childs is my real father, I asked. It's very likely from what Grandma said. I didn't get the opportunity to talk about it with my father. I took the money and went off to fetch you, leaving Grandma Olivia to explain it to him. But why didn't my mother just tell me the truth? Why would she blame Grandpa Samuel? That's something you're gonna have to ask her, Melanie. She was either protecting Kenneth or herself or what? He shrugged. I sat back, digesting the story. If what he told me was true, then my real father was back in Truro and I was going to the right place. Have you ever spoken to Kenneth Childs? I asked. I've said hello when I've seen him, but it's not easy to see him. He lives like a hermit on the point. It's like the judge said the other night, all he does is work. He doesn't have a wife or any other children? No. Everyone thinks he's strange, but as I told you, they accept it because he's an artist. Some artistic hermit living in the beach house away from the people. That's my father, I muttered, stunned with each and every revelation Carrie uttered. Anyway, at least you got the chance to find the truth out now, he said. I shook my head. Maybe I shouldn't, I thought. Maybe I should live with the lies. What am I going to do, I asked, with reality dropping all over me. Walking up to him and ask, hey, are you my real father? I'm not sure. We'll have to talk to my father about it, perhaps, he said. Your father? Huh. You think that he would talk to me about this? Yes, Carrie said, his eyes small. He will, or I'll tell my grandmother and she'll wring his neck. I laughed, just thinking about Grandma Olivia chewing into Uncle Jacob. Carrie smiled. I'm glad I found you so quickly, Melanie. I nodded and then sighed deeply, the sadness in my heart sprouting its dark flowers again. Papa George died, I told him. There was no one there when I arrived yesterday. Grandma Arlene had already moved away to live with her sister. The trailer home was closed and my old home had nothing in it. I know, Alice told me. I'm sorry. Alice helped me a lot, but I spent last night in the trailer sleeping on the floor. I had no idea where my things are. I didn't even think about them. I went to the cemetery too. It felt so strange. I was angry and sad and confused. Mommy didn't call while I was away, did she? Not when I was home, he said. How did you ever hope to find her by going to Los Angeles? It's huge. I hear even people who live there get lost. I didn't know what else to do. I was alone, I said mournfully. You're not alone. You'll never be alone. Remember that, he declared, his eyes firm and determined and full of sincerity. Thank you, Carrie. He smiled warmly, his eyes soft and loving. Then he changed his expression and took a breath. Now I'll tell you the truth, he said. I was shaking in my boots when I snapped at Grandma. I was afraid she would throw me out and call my father, and that would be that. I thought you said her bark was worse than her bite. I did, but that doesn't mean her bite doesn't hurt too. The bus rolled on to Boston. I was like a ball in a pinball machine, rolling back and forth, but it wasn't for nothing, I thought. After all, I was unraveling those lies that had been spun so tightly around me, and soon I would reach the truth. It should have made me happy to realize that, but all it did was make my heart thump and make me tremble inside. Since I hadn't slept much in the trailer, I dozed off for most of the trip, my head on Carrie's shoulder. When we arrived in Boston, we had something to eat, and then we got into his truck and started for Providencetown. It was nearly morning by the time we saw the town and the Pilgrims' Monument ahead of us. The rim of the sun was just peeking over the eastern horizon, turning the sky violet and orange, its bright gold edged in all those heavenly colors. The darkness retreated from the ocean, rising away like a blanket being peeled from a silver sheet. A tanker was silhouetted against the orange sky. It was breathtaking. The beauty of Cape Cod, the promise of revelation and truth. the return after my desperate flight. It all made me dizzy with emotion. I was nervous, afraid, and elated and excited, happy and sad. I didn't know whether to cry or sigh with pleasure, to feel relief or more tension. Lucky I was suspended, huh? Carrie said, smiling as we entered the city limits. Lucky? Sure, I wouldn't have been free to go find you. Actually, I would have left anyway, and then I might have been suspended because of that. Let this be the end of all that, Carrie. You've got to graduate. Aye, aye, Captain, he said, saluting. We cruised through the town and made a turn toward the house. How would we be greeted? Would anyone be awake? Maybe I should just sleep on the beach, I said. He looked at me with a weary smile. It's time you got a good rest, he said. You've got a lot to do during the next few weeks. For one thing, you've got to get through my finals and take the finals of your own. How right he was, I thought. Maybe he was the smartest and wisest of us all, after all. It was deadly quiet when we entered the house. A small hall light had been left on. We looked at each other, and then, as silently as we could, we started up the stairs, but the steps creaked like tattletales. By the time we reached the landing, Uncle Jacob, standing in his long nightshirt, was at his bedroom door. We paused, and he stared at us for a moment, then nodded. Get some sleep. We'll talk tomorrow. He retreated to his bedroom and softly closed the door. That was his way of saying he was glad we were back safely, Carrie explained. Well, why can't he just say so? Does he ever show any emotion besides anger? I've never seen him laugh or cry. The only time I ever saw my father cry was when he heard Laura was missing. He went off toward the cranberry bog and stood on the hill sobbing. Then at the memorial service. He's not a man that shows emotion. Except his anger, I reminded him. That's just... I know, I said, smiling. His bark, not his bite. Carrie smiled. I had to admit the sight of the soft mattress and comforter was a wonderful sight. I didn't even bother to get undressed. I just plopped into bed and hugged the fluffy pillow, embraced my stuffed cat, and fell asleep. I didn't waken until late afternoon. Vaguely I recalled, as if it were a dream, Aunt Sarah coming into the room and standing by the bed, gazing down at me, even stroking my hair. I may have groaned and turned over, but I didn't speak. After a rare moment, she left. My bones creaked when I sat up. I felt so scuzzy. It was as if I had cobwebs under my arms. A hot shower had never been so marvelous. I washed my hair and brushed my teeth and got dressed in a pair of jeans and a clean blouse. I smelled the aroma of something delicious, even before I came downstairs. You're up. How are you feeling, dear? Aunt Sarah asked. I'm fine, Aunt Sarah. I'm so sorry, I said quickly. Nothing to be sorry about, my dear. Now that you're home safe again, I have a fish stew cooking ready for you. I bet you're hungry. Starving, I admitted. My stomach churned in the anticipation of good food and the bread. Just sit at the table and I'll bring it. It's not supper time, but you've got to get something warm in your stomach. Where's Carrie? I asked. Is he still asleep? Carrie? Oh, no. He was up to take May to school, then to return to school himself. He must be exhausted, I said. It isn't the first time that he's got up most in the middle of the night, and I'm sure it won't be the last. That's a fisherman's life, dear. Carrie's used to it. Do you know why I left like that, Aunt Sarah? No, dear, she said quickly, and walked away to demonstrate that she didn't care to know either. Aunt Sarah was definitely the calm in the family, ready to slam shut her shell and ignore anything unpleasant. It seemed almost cruel to make her listen or see what she didn't want to see. I said nothing. I ate and waited for Carrie, May, and Uncle Jacob to return. But before they did, Aunt Sarah and I had a surprise visitor. My aunt came running to the dining room as I was finishing the stew. "She's here," she cried. "Oh dear, dear. The house is a mess too," she said, wringing her hands with an invisible dish towel of worry. "Who's here, Aunt Sarah?" "Olivia," she announced. "She hasn't been here since I can't remember." She went rushing about, picking everything up that looked out of place. Moments later, Grandma and Olivia came to the front door. Aunt Sarah shouted for me to let Grandma Olivia in, and I rose, trembling a bit myself. When I opened the door, she stormed past me and walked into the living room. "Hello, Olivia," Aunt Sarah said. "It's so nice to see you." "I want to talk to Melanie alone," she snapped. "Oh, of course," Aunt Sarah smiled at me and retreated. Grandma Olivia peeled off her black velvet gloves and sat in Uncle Jacob's chair. She gazed at me with her eyes dark and small. "Sit," she ordered. I went to the settee. "What did you think you would accomplish with this dramatic gesture, running off like that?" "It wasn't a dramatic gesture. I wanted to go home." "Home?" She spit the word as if it had filled her mouth with ugly, bitter taste. She looked away. "Home is here," she said, pointing to her temple. "And here," she said, pointing to her heart. "I was going to go live with people who don't lie," I said. "Everyone lies. It's a matter of survival," she declared. "Then why hate my mother for lying?" I retorted. She widened her eyes. "I'm not here to talk about your mother. I'm here to talk about you," she said. "As I told you, you're my sister's granddaughter, and I made a promise to my father." "I know," I said. "Thank you for being so honest," I wanted to add, "and for using the truth like darts." "I didn't tell you everything," she confessed. I sat back as she paused. "My father left both my sister and me a considerable fortune. Most of what you see, what we have, does not come from my husband's brilliant business. Samuel was never a good businessman. To this day, I don't think he understands what a profit and loss statement is," she said disdainfully. "But that's a different matter. As I told you, Belinda is under a doctor's care. That is eating away at her inheritance, but even if she lives to be 100, it won't eat but a small portion of it. The money is well invested and earns good interest. To come directly to the point, your mother would have inherited what was left in Belinda's fortune if I hadn't helped Belinda see more clearly. Instead, a trust has been formed, and you are the heir." "I?" "That's correct. It's specifically set up to provide you with your educational needs, your basic needs, until you're 21. After that, you can waste it as you see fit. I'm the administrator of your trust." "Why didn't you tell me that before?" I asked. "Why? I didn't feel you needed to know all this until you were significantly retrained." "Retrained?" "Until you lived with the family in a moral setting and lost whatever bad habits Haley might have instilled in you." "She didn't instill any bad habits in me," I replied firmly. "I wish that were true, but frankly, I don't see how it's possible for you to have grown up as her daughter and not be somehow affected. Anyway, I'm glad Carrie got you to come to your senses in return." "Why?" I challenged. "You obviously hate my mother and hate the sight of me." "I don't hate the sight of you. I told you why I have the feelings I have towards your mother, but I'm sufficiently impressed with you." to believe that you have the capability to overcome your unfortunate upbringing. If you will behave and listen to wiser minds, you'll have a lot to gain. As you now know, it will be a considerable fortune, more than most people make in 2 lifetimes of hard work. There, now I've given you your incentive. I've welcomed you back, she said, as if that were the prescription to treat her bout of conscience. Welcome me back? I shook my head and snorted. I came back here, didn't I? She protested. I stared at her a moment. This was the closest she would come to an apology, I thought. Whether it was because of the promise that she made to her father, or came from a genuine and sincere remorse for telling me things bluntly and causing me to run off, I didn't know. I would just ask you for one thing, she continued. What's that? I asked. Let the past be the past. Concern yourself with your future. Nothing can be gained by digging up ugly days and ugly memories, she said. I don't know if I can do that, I said. There are still things I need to know. Her eyes grew small and her face firm. She leaned toward me. I would not like to hear that you're going around Providencetown asking questions and stirring up gossip about the Logan family. I wouldn't do that. Make sure, she warned. Then she rose. Stop by the house from time to time and tell me how you're getting along, she said. Have Carrie bring you, she added before leaving the room. Aunt Sarah was in the hallway. Would you like to stay for dinner, Olivia? Certainly not, Grandma said. She looked at me for a moment and then turned and walked out of the house. It was as if the wind blown through and shut the door. Wasn't that nice, Aunt Sarah said, as if some member of royalty had lowered herself to visit. Dear, come and help me set the table. I stood there for a moment in a daze. I was to inherit a fortune? Had Mommy or Daddy ever known? If they had, they couldn't tell me about it without telling me everything else. The more I learned, the more I was amazed at what they had sacrificed to run off together the way they had. May and Carrie arrived only minutes before Uncle Jacob. Carrie looked tired but did his best to hide it. May was very excited to see me and filled me with so many things to tell me. Her hands never stopped moving. Aunt Sarah went on and on about Grandma Olivia. Carrie looked at me with surprise and expectations as I whispered that I would tell him everything later. In the meantime, I helped serve dinner. Since I had just eaten, I only ate dessert, a piece of Aunt Sarah's blueberry pie. After I helped clean up, I went upstairs and joined Carrie in his attic room. I told him everything Grandma Olivia had told me. He had not known about my fortune. I'm not even sure if my father knows about that, he said. That's wonderful, Melanie. Money isn't very important to me right now, Carrie. The truth is, I think Grandma Olivia was hoping that I would willingly forget all the lies just so I could get my inheritance. It was as if she were trying to buy me off with a promise of it. He nodded, thinking. Can we talk to your father now? Would he talk to us? I asked. I was afraid to approach him myself. Let's try, Carrie said. We descended the stairs together and found Uncle Jacob reading his paper and listening to the news on the radio. He looked up surprised. What is it? He asked. Melanie has some questions for you, Dad, he said. Because of the things Grandma told her and me about her mother. You know how I feel about talking about that. He started to raise his paper. Grandma feels we're old enough to know things. Why can't you? Carrie challenged. I think he's braver with me standing beside him. Only now I felt responsible for any bad feeling between him and his father. Uncle Jacob thought a moment, then lowered the paper to his lap. He turned off the radio. You want to hear about your mother? You want to hear the ugly truth? He said with a note of a threat. I want to know the truth, I replied, undaunted, ugly or otherwise. All right, sit, he said, nodding at the settee. We both went to it. Uncle Jacob lit his pipe and puffed for a few moments. Haley was always getting into trouble with boys. Either Chester or I had to come to her aid all the time, trying to save her from herself. On more than one occasion, I found her down at the beach with someone doing things I'd rather not describe. I got into fights, and so did Chester. We were teased a lot. The family was disgraced a lot, but nothing seemed to change her. She was fascinated with herself. Your mother was always a source of misery for my parents, he said, pointing with his pipe. She was caught smoking, drinking, doing all kinds of immoral stuff in school dozens of times. If my mother hadn't influence in this town, they would have thrown Haley out of the public school. She was actually arrested twice for her lewd behavior on the beach when she was in high school. He paused. You still want to hear this? I swallowed back the throat lump and nodded. About when she was 15, 16, she was caught with a truck driver out in the dunes. They were going to throw the book at the guy. He was about 28 or so, and she was obviously underage. Only my mother was worried about the scandal, so it was kept quiet, and the truck driver was let go. Mother tried to get a doctor to help Haley, the same doctor who was treating Belinda at the time. I recall, but nothing seemed to help. She was a wild creature. She'd do whatever she wanted, whatever she fancied. Chester and I did our best to cover up for her and protect her. He paused and sat back thinking. The lines in his face grew deeper, his eyes colder. Then he took a breath and continued. The year she was supposed to graduate from high school, Kenneth Childs began coming up, spending time with us more and more. We liked Kenneth and our families were close. In those days, Chester and I thought of him as another brother. Kenneth was going to college in Boston. He would come up on the weekends. Sometimes Chester and I didn't know he was in town, but Haley always did. She was over at the Childs a lot of times, and sometimes there was no one else there but Kenneth. That was the year she got pregnant. She made up that story about my father. Chester always favored her more than I did, overlooked her sins. He made excuses for her all the time. He refused to believe Kenneth would make her pregnant and not own up to it. Haley filled him with lies about Dad. He then swallowed them because he was so hypnotized with her himself. I told him she was a liar and a whore. I told him she once tried to seduce me and he got in a fight with me. He took her side and they ran off together. That's the story, he concluded, like a sharp slap of thunder at the end of a rainstorm. There was a heavy silence in the room. Carrie looked at me. Have you ever spoken to Kenneth Childs since? I asked. We've had some words, mainly because of the judge. I went to his mother's funeral, of course, but it's hard for me to look at him face to face and not think what happened. Did you ever ask him outright about it? No, he said, and I don't intend to ever talk about it. You're my mother's sister's grandchild. Your Aunt Sarah's fond of you, and from what I hear, you're doing well in school. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need or until your mother decides to be a mother instead of a tramp. That might never happen, of course, and as soon you'll be on your own anyway. But I won't have any more talk about those days in my house, he said firmly, and I don't want any scandals. He looked at Carrie. Satisfied? Carrie turned to me. You want to ask him anything else, Melanie? No, I said. I was crying inside, the tears falling behind my eyes and over my heart. Uncle Jacob went back to his paper and put on the radio again. I left the room, pounding up the stairs, and I threw myself on the bed and lay there embracing my stuffed cat. There was a soft knock on my door. Yes. Carrie poked his head in. Are you okay? No, but it's all right, I said. I guess in my heart I knew everything your father said. It's just hard hearing it like that. Carrie nodded. It'll be all right. Things will be fine, he promised. I smiled at him. Sure. I better go up and start studying, he said. I gotta pass those finals. Yes, you better, Carrie, I said as he started to close the door. He raised his eyebrow. One day this week, will you take me to see Kenneth Childs? Sure, he said. I don't know what he'll do. He doesn't like people coming around much, I know. I hear that when he works, he won't even come to the door. Still, I'd like to try to meet him, I said. Okay. Nose to the grindstone, he said, and left. I lay there thinking of a long time, just thinking and remembering the silly things Mommy had done, recalling her whining and crying and Daddy soothing her all the time. Then I thought about her with Archie Marlin. Children inherit so much of their parents, I thought. Would I become like her one day? It frightened and intrigued me. I had to know who my real father was. Then I can learn what part of him I had inherited, and whether that part was strong enough to overcome the bad that I inherited from Mommy. To be without a past is almost like being without a future, I thought. I would know my past. No temptation of fortune, no threat, nothing would keep me from pursuing the truth. No one at school knew anything about my trip back to West Virginia. They didn't question why I'd been absent. Some of the girls thought it was in sympathy with Carrie and his unfair suspension. I didn't say it was, but I didn't deny it. There was a lot of excitement because the school year was approaching an end. The week before the finals was the week mainly for review. At the end of the week of the finals, the school would have its variety show, the proceeds of which went towards college scholarships. The principal, Mr. Webster, had forgotten that I played the fiddle. He had Miss Topper, the school music teacher who was in charge of the show, ask me to perform. I tried to get out of it, claiming the truth that I hadn't been playing much in the past few months, but Miss Topper was desperate. I barely have enough performers to fill a half an hour, much less an hour. I need you. You have to do 2 numbers, she pleaded. It's all in good fun and for a good cause. Won't you help us? How could I refuse? But this, along with my anticipated visit with Kenneth Childs and my final exams, made me more nervous than a flock of hens with a fox at the gate. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. Carrie was more excited about my performing than I was. He insisted on watching and listening to me practice. Aunt Sarah thought it was wonderful too. Even Uncle Jacob looked and listened with interest. I decided that I would play one of Papa George's favorites, Caddy Klein, a traditional Woody Guthrie folk favorite. This land is your land, I sang when I played, of course. Uncle Jacob looked amazed, and Aunt Sarah had the whitest, happiest smile on her face. Carrie beamed. I felt sorry for May, but she seemed content, feeling the vibrations when I led her or just watching my face and actions. I didn't think I was good enough to actually perform, but when Uncle Jacob said I was, he hinted that he would attend the show, which Carrie said would be the first. The only community event I'd ever seen him attend was the Blessing of the Fleet. Carrie suggested on that Thursday after we brought May home from school, he and I would go to the point to see if I could talk to Kenneth Childs. What are you going to say? He asked. I thought for a moment. I'll introduce myself first and then see what he says. What if he says nothing? What if he just nods and walks away? I'll find a way to get him to talk to me, I said. Actually, I was excited of the idea of just seeing him, seeing if there was anything about him that reminded me of myself. I couldn't really tell much from the few photos I'd seen. The last time I saw him, he had a beard, Carrie said. Laura and I used to go up to the beach there, and I've never been to the house or the studio. What excuse are we going to give him for driving over to see him, he asked. Well, I'll tell him my mother asked him to stop by and say hello, I replied. Carrie nodded and smiled. You've been scheming, haven't you? That's all I've been doing lately, I admitted. Okay, Thursday, he promised. My heart was pounding in anticipation. The night before, I sat at the desk after stuffing an envelope with money Alice had given me, wrapping it carefully so no one would know that I wrote a letter. Dear Alice, you'll be surprised to learn that I didn't go to Los Angeles after all. My cousin Carrie was sent by Grandma Olivia to bring me back to Providencetown, and he found me at the bus station in Richmond. I agreed to return when he told me that he thought he knew who my father is. He's an artist who lives in Providencetown. Tomorrow, Carrie's taking me over to his house and studio, and for the first time in my life, I will set eyes on the man who could be my father. I've seen pictures of him when he was younger, but seeing pictures is one thing. Standing before him in the flesh will be another. I'm rehearsing what I'll say and how I'll say it. You'd laugh if you saw how I pose before the mirror in my room and pretend I'm seeing him. Everything I can think to say sounds silly. I'm afraid he'll just look at me and shake his head and maybe shut the door in my face. I don't know how I would feel if that happened. Apparently he's a man who keeps to himself, so that just might happen. I'll write and tell you about it afterward. Speaking of rehearsals, you won't believe this, but I've been talked into performing at the school's annual scholarship variety show. I'll be playing my fiddle, 2 tunes. I practiced and have played for the family. They all seemed impressed, but I'm terrified. I'm returning all the money you lent me. It was nice of you to do it, and I know that you're my one true friend. I hope we'll always remain friends, no matter how many miles apart we might be. I still haven't heard from Mommy. When I asked her why she lied to me the last time she called, she sounded frantic and very distant, and I have a fear that she won't call again. There's a lot she and I have to discuss now that I'm old enough to understand. I've had unpleasant things about her when she was younger, my age, a little older. It saddens and sickens me, but I try not to think about it. My grandmother has told me that I'm an heiress and someday I'll have a lot of money. How's that for a surprise? Me? Someday rich? Right now, I don't even think about it. It really doesn't seem important. What's important is that I might be on the verge of learning the whole truth about myself and my family. It frightens me, and yet I know how much I want to know everything. As I write this letter, I'm looking at the watch Papa George gave me. Inside, I placed the blade of grass from Daddy's grave. Even though it was there, I feel so far away, not only in miles, but in time. It makes me feel as if I'm about to become someone else, as if I've lived a different life, a life that will soon end. After all this, a few things happen and I'm able to bring with me are all that I have from my former life. Of course, I have memories, but they're burning down like candles. I'm afraid of being left in the dark. As soon as I finish this letter, I'm going to practice my fill, and then I'm going to go to sleep and dream of a new tomorrow where lies crumble like fallen autumn leaves beneath my feet, where promises of happiness and hope sprout rich and green like the mountains and the hills in the spring. Say a prayer for me, and thanks for being my truest friend in all the world. Love, Melanie. I put the letter in the envelope. I played my fiddle and then crawled into bed and had a dream that I told Alice I would have. Tomorrow would be a new day.